The first round of presidential polls in Turkey have not boded well for the authoritarian ruler Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He has been given a tough competition by his contender Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, a leader who espouses the hope of bringing back democracy into Turkey. The second round of polls is in 2 weeks' time, and it will determine if Turkey will be continuing to be ruled by an authoritarian and conservative president for a third decade, or will it experience a new, more democratic course under Kılıç? Erdogan, under his Islamist-ruled regime, Turkey for almost a decade now. There has been clampdown on democracy, the judiciary, the executive and the media. Descendants have been put behind bars. Over the past decade, Erdogan has cracked down on peaceful protests and freedom of speech. He has overturned the results of the general election in 2015. He has renewed Turkey's war against Kurdistan Workers' Party, purged the country of his enemies in the wake of the 2016 coup attempt. He's persuaded Turkey to switch to a presidential system and embarked on an ambitious and an unpredictable foreign policy adventure. Will Erdogan allow a democratic election to take place? Will he risk getting ousted from the position of absolute power he has painstakingly built for himself over the years? I'm going to quickly start off this conversation with Ambassador Sajjanar. Ambassador, at least there are winds of change and democratic change that are visible in the country of Turkey that has been Islamicized by Erdogan ever since he came to power as the president in 2014. Even before he was as the Prime Minister of Turkey, he had been able to fortify his presence as an authoritarian, as an Islamist ruler. Now, whether it is going to be democracy that is going to be able to wrest control over the authoritarian regime of Erdogan is a question that we are all asking, and perhaps even scared of getting a response of, because with the dictatorial style of Erdogan, and he's been able to create himself a position of absolute dictatorial regime, like the way it has happened in China or the way it has happened in Russia, the difficult part would be to remove himself from the position that he has held.
No, you're very right, Megha. First of all, thank you very much for having me on your show. And, the first round of the elections for Turkey's presidency, as also for the Turkish parliament, they have taken place yesterday. Now, the previous polls had suggested that Erdogan's opponent, the major opponent, there is more than one of them, the major opponent who has the support of a large number of opposition parties, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, that he had an edge. It would be a very tightly contested election, a very tightly fought election. But then the opponent had an edge. But unfortunately, these pre-poll indications were not borne out after the results of the polling yesterday were declared. According to the Turkish election law, anyone who gets more than 50% in the first round is declared elected the president. Now, Erdogan was able to get about 49.5%. So just being a shade less than what was required. But his contestant, the major contestant, was able to muster only about 44.9%.
Right.
So there is a good gap of 4.5%. Now the
Ambassador, maybe I'll come back to you. I know
okay, sure.
you're having throat issues, throat, but I'll come back to you. And Gautam Mukherjee, I'll quickly get you into the conversation. And my only question being that even when there are elections that are taking place, a man who has been able to install presidential style elections simply because he wants to rule forever, like what has happened with Xi Jinping in China or what has happened with Putin in Russia, a man who aspires to be the president of Turkey and perhaps more nations across the globe, because he has an expansionist view of growing his empire, not just within Turkey, but in the rest of the Middle East, Central Asia, and then perhaps in Europe and other parts of the world as well. How would he even digest the fact that there is a democratic leader who is challenging him on his very turf. Even if he were to get more votes, he were to get people's support, would it be possible for Erdogan to then cover up and impose tyranny, impose dictatorship in the region?
Well, it seems to me, Megha, that for once he probably allowed a free and fair election in which the opposition leader has something less than 1%, behind him. And he does not have enough votes in the first round to actually make the 50% mark, even though he's at 49.5. So there'll be a runoff in which Erdogan is likely to make up the other 0.5 and win. But the significant thing here is that half the electorate who have perhaps for the first time been allowed to vote have voted for change. And this will have a bearing going ahead. But remember, there was a coup attempt a little while back, which Erdogan crushed very ruthlessly and effectively. So he is not beyond using extrajudicial tactics should any threat really present itself. But at the same time, he's getting a bit old. He's been doing this for many years. For 20 years, he has been either prime minister or president. The economy is in a dreadful shape with little hope of recovery, given the Ukraine war, the COVID, the post-COVID situation, and Turkey's prospects going forward. So it's not easy for him. But at the same time, he did win quite effectively in the areas that were affected by the recent earthquake. Mm-hmm. It's Erdogan who won, even though a lot of the buildings fell down, enormous amount of people were killed, but he hung in there. So now there is a transition coming. It is underground at the moment, particularly if he manages to win the runoff elections. But Erdogan hasn't got an enormous amount of time to go.
Okay.
Megha.
Okay, fair enough. So his stint of bringing about presidential elections in a want to then stay as the elected president of Islamist Turkey perhaps might not have boded well for him with the decision that he took in 2015 up until 2023. Arvind Singh Tejawat also on the telecast with me. Arvind, what are going to be the bigger ramifications of a complete turnaround of who Turkey is going to be ruled by? If democracy comes back into power, how are things going to change for the world and particularly for India?
Right, Megha. Actually, the scenario is a little bit different in Turkey because there is a large number of voters who are residing outside the Turkey. So still we should not be assured that the Erdogan is going to win. And there is a hope that the Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu may also go for winning the election. But if we think by the India viewpoint, then there is a big difference between these two people. That the Erdogan is habitual of doing the nationalist politics, and we know that the most of people there in Turkey are it's the Muslim-dominated. The religion which dominates there in that country is Islam. So the most of the time, the Erdogan means given the if we call the diplomatically unfair and means what it called not supported by the wiseness in favor of the Pakistan. So, of course, the Erdogan means the Indian people and the most of the Indian diplomats and probably the political leaders, they are not having a good vibes for the Erdogan. So they must be looking for the change in that politics, and they'll be looking the Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu may win the elections. But at the same time, I believe, Megha, that nothing is going to change at a major level in foreign policy of Turkey. because finally they have to keep the notions of the people over there in Turkey. So the things are not going to be changed. But if the Turkey since is facing a lot of economic crisis and recent the Syria Turkey earthquake, so lots of problem is going to be faced by the government at the moment. So I think that now the politicians over there should not be outspoken.
Okay, but
So
but
that
isn't
thing is
it?
going
But
to be made up.
shouldn't it be obvious that amidst the crackdown that has been initiated by Erdogan ever since he came to power in 2014, he won the election, a dictatorial regime came into being, Islamist regime came into being. He has been tearing down on the peaceful protests, peaceful dharnas that have taken place. There have been lawmakers, there have been lawyers, there have been people from the media who've been put behind bars if they raise their questions against Erdogan. So wouldn't it be natural and obvious decision for the people of Turkey to vote against Erdogan?
Megha, you'll be amazed to learn this, that the law there in Turkey is not very much favorable to the journalists, and you'll be surprised to learn it that many journalists has been sent behind the bars.
Right.
So now the thing that the India, if you compare it to the freedom here in India, what the journalists can speak and the editors and the newspapers can write against the government, the same scenario is not there in Turkey. So, but between the people there in the Turkey, they have that kind of feelings that okay, the laws must be the changed in terms of, because for the freedom of speech. So people they run the movement several times, but at the end of the result is safer. So yes, of course, the people they have that kind of feelings, and it is ruled by not exactly the dictator Megha, but yeah, of course, you are right.
Okay, Ambassador Sajjanar, if such are the obvious state of affairs in Turkey, how is it that Erdogan has been able to still get a majority of the votes in the first round of polling at 49.5% or just close to 50%?
You know, he's a good speaker. He's very articulate. He's able to connect well with the people. So although, you know, as far as his performance is concerned, he has nothing much to speak about, nothing much to talk about. As has been mentioned by the earlier speakers, the economy is not doing well at all. And even what you have also been saying, that he's become extremely dictatorial. But and also the earthquake, you know, about 50,000 people lost their lives in the recent earthquake, and it was shown to be, you know, the construction, the quality of construction was very poor, and so on and so forth. But I think all these aspects, his opponent, unfortunately, is not a very inspiring person. He's not a very good speaker himself. And so, you know, he's been heading the opposition, he's been leading the opposition for the last more than a decade. Since 2010, he's been leading the opposition, but he's still not been able to challenge. So, you know, it's not only there, you know, all these votes, 45% or so that he has won, they have been against Erdogan. But then the opponent also has to have, you know, something that he can offer to the people. And this, unfortunately, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu has not been able to offer. There have been reports, I've spoken to some people in Turkey who seem to suggest that, you know, some of the other members of his party, if they had been the front face for, you know, as the opposition, joint opposition consensus candidate against Erdogan, maybe they would have stood a better chance. But I think Erdogan is a charismatic figure in that sense.
Okay.
And he has a very large measure of support. And maybe last point, Megha, that I could mention is, you know, that under Erdogan, the prestige and the profile and the global role of Turkey has increased very significantly. You know, he is engaging himself in all the major challenges. You know, when it was Armenia, Azerbaijan war, he went in to help Azerbaijan, and it was a great victory for Turkey. Right now, Russia, Ukraine, he has been negotiating on that. He has been sort of, as far as the war with Russia is concerned, with Syria is concerned, he's been able to sort of, play his cards very effectively.
Right.
So the position of Turkey has increased, and it is the ambition of Erdogan that he should emerge as a leader of the Muslim Ummah, of the Muslim world, and in opposition to Saudi Arabia and to UAE. And in fact, in that sense, he has been pandering to Pakistan. He's been trying to sort of, support Pakistan on Kashmir, on Article 370 and 35A and other things. And that has, of course, proven to be anathema to India. We had gone out and supported under Operation Dost for, the earthquake that took place recently. But then he, rather than repaying in kind, he again came out, the Turkish delegation, and spoke against India in the UN Human Rights Commission in Geneva. So I think his ambitions are there, and maybe some of the people in Turkey like that because they would like their country to have a much better image, a much bigger influence, and better profile in the world.
Absolutely. Gautam Mukherjee, interesting aspect. And also I remember that a very important trilateral that had happened, and those images were circulating across newspapers and news channels and digital media houses of Imran Khan, the then Prime Minister of Pakistan, and there was Erdogan, who was the President of Turkey, and then we had the former Prime Minister of Indonesia, and an alternative ummah that they had wanted to create. Obviously, those plans fizzled out with the UAE and Saudi Arabia and other ummah countries taking note of the situation and completely stopping this creation. But again, how does this bode for India? If it were democracy or democratic leader by the name of Kilik Daroglu who comes to power, who's fighting, contending against Erdogan, will there be a change in foreign policy for Turkey? Would it bode well for Turkey? Would it bode well for India as well? Because under Erdogan, Turkey has been raising the issue of Kashmir time and again, which is unfair for India. They have also been putting up training camps in down south, in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and also in training these re-education camps, as they call them, in Kashmir. So how do things work if Erdogan is removed from his position?
Well, I think he is finding his dream of being the head of a new caliphate, which was all that with Pakistan and Malaysia and so on. Indonesia has always been moderate.
Yeah. Sorry, I beg your pardon. That was Malaysia, Mahathir Mohamad.
And Malaysia, that particular man was kicked out. India retaliated by refusing to buy palm oil, which was then restored when his successor took over. And we now have good relations with Malaysia. Pakistan is a basket case. There's no point forming and hoping for it to go anywhere. It's also terrorist central. Imran Khan is more or less in the wilderness. I don't think the army is going to let him back, and he does not have the wherewithal to come back despite the army. In fact, no political party or no political person in Pakistan does. Pakistan's economy is collapsing. So this whole business of trying to provoke the OCI and create a kind of a caliphate with Erdogan in charge hasn't worked, and he doesn't have the finance to try and pump prime it. He's also not very popular in NATO.
Yeah.
He's been making issues with various new entrants to the NATO countries, saying that this or that is objectionable to Turkey. As far as the opposition guy is an unknown quantity. What I cannot fathom as yet, truth be told, because there's very little news on it, is what is the popular mood? I know when Erdogan surged to more and more power, and I happened to visit Turkey around the beginning of it, and there was a sort of an Islamist surge, which was quite alarming considering that Turkey was one of the most progressive Islamic countries created into a secular ideal by its founder.
Yeah.
But from there, Erdogan, like Ziaul Haq, started to exploit the Islamist side of things.
Yeah, I think
And
that
the
entire conversion of the Hagia Sophia church from the Byzantine
Yeah.
Empire grabbed global headlines. It was converted into the mosque, and in fact, Erdogan went about saying that he would also convert more of these churches into mosques, which was also shocking for the entire world, but not so much perhaps for the people of Turkey, because it seemed as if it was an Islamist state that was coming into being. But the power of Erdogan perhaps has not made so absolute thus far.
But I wonder, Megha, if the popular mood, which will be reflected by the opposition guy in the unlikely event he gains power, but if he does gain power, and if the popular mood is to get away from all this Islamist extremism, then it will be very good for Turkey, it will be good for Europe, it will be good for NATO, and certainly good for us. We have nothing against Turkey. We would like to collaborate with them, at least as far as their drones go. The Bakhtiar drones are very nice. But it's a matter of, and I think he hasn't said much about Kashmir in quite some time now. That's also something to be hopeful about.
But also his tilting at this point of time to Jerusalem and Israel and the Israeli attacks on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So obviously another Pandora's box that has been opened by Erdogan over here in trying to meddle into those matters as well. Now, Arvind Singh Tijawat, quickly getting a response from you. What side should India be on? Now, what side should the NATO powers be on? There was Gautam Mukherjee who spoke about how the association of NATO with Turkey has not been as smooth as it would have liked to be. There have been wars that have been perpetuated and supported by Turkey, which are not in favor of the French, or which are not in favor of the NATO nations in the Central Asian region or in the Northern African regions. Now, in such a situation, they would be happy to let go, to want Erdogan to be removed from the position.
Megha, with due respect, I would love to let you remember the NAM politics done by the India. At that moment, India was not empowered enough and was doing the international politics and sent India, his army to the Korea, and the Nehru was playing as a world leader. So I suppose that Erdogan is suffering from the same phobia, the syndrome of self-admiration. So that's why the people, the world leaders, they take care of him and they give the voices to, like recently the Erdogan poked his noses in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So he's doing, but as a nation, the Turkey is not playing any important role in the world politics. And that's why our diplomats are well aware about. And I suppose what done by the Erdogan is not going to harm any interest. In fact, the Erdogan is going to sacrifice his own nation interest by sacrificing the trade and business with India. So it's not going to be very much effective. And I think my last comment that there is no big difference between the Erdogan and Kemal Roglu. So I suppose that the politics is not going to be
foreign policy is not going to be as different. That's an interesting take. We are going to closely watch out what happens in Turkey in the next couple of weeks. May 28th is when the second round of presidential poll takes place. Whether it is going to be Erdogan or is it going to be his contender and dissident as well in Kerem, Well, that is the question that remains. And how is it going to then impact foreign policy and impact India, which has been fighting Erdogan over a number of issues, including Kashmir?
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.